video, we'll talk a little bit about documenting sources using MLA. You should have gotten some of this instruction during your English 1 course, but I feel like it's always helpful to go over. Plus, if you took English 1 a little while ago, it might be a good refresher, especially because the MLA, the Modern Language Association, has made some recent updates to documentation styles. So what is it all about? So MLA stands for the Modern Language Association, which is a group that publishes a guide to documenting sources specifically in the humanities disciplines. So English, literature, history, any other discipline that's associated with the humanities. And you'll notice that for some other courses, specifically for science-related courses, those classes will use a documentation source called APA, which is published by the American Psychological Association. So just be really careful which documentation source you're using depending on the discipline for which you're doing writing and research. Right, so for MLA, here are a couple of web resources that are helpful. So the first one here links you directly to the MLA's website, so that might be helpful, specifically for the 8th edition, which is the most recent update to the MLA style guide. And the second one I've linked to in previous weeks. This is the online writing lab, or the OWL at Purdue University. And they do a great job of keeping with the changes in MLA and updating their website to be helpful for students. So that is always available to you online. Right, so getting down to the MLA 8th edition, again, the Modern Language Association decided that with the advent of new technology and all the different changes in types of information and media sources, they had to go back and revise their standards because there were a lot of information types that didn't really fit into any of the citation formats that they had available. So here is an overview of what to look for when you're citing sources, and these kind of go in the order of the citation, and we'll look at an example in just a little bit. But you want to make sure that you can locate the author if there is in fact an author for the source. As we all know, sometimes websites and even some journals publish articles by either anonymous authors or they've paid a writer to do it and it becomes the property of that website, so they don't list the author specifically. So if there is an author, you'll list it in the citation. If not, then you skip that part and you just go right down the list to the next one. Next, you'll have the title of the source itself. Right, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Number 3 needs a little explanation though, the title of the container. So they're using this word container to try to encompass, I think, all of the different ways in which sources can be delivered. So here are some examples of containers, right? So the essays and stories and poems are contained in our textbook. So our textbook would be a container. Right, another example, if I'm reading an article that's been published by the New York Times, the New York Times is the container for that article, whether it's the print version or the online version, right? So you're thinking of the container as the housing or the casing for that particular source. All right, next are the contributors, and the contributors are different from the author, right? So the contributors might be the authors of the container, right? The contributors might be the publishers, of the website. So the contributors are not the author of the source itself, but folks who have, kind of been part of that process. If you've got a work in translation, the translator would be a contributor. If you have a work that's been edited by somebody, that editor would be the contributor. So again, different from the author of the source. Right, next you've got version. There are a lot of texts, including our own textbook, that have multiple editions or they come in different versions, whether it's, the same title that's print or online. So the version is the edition or the type of source that you've got. Right, next is the number. The number will come, I think, into play for us a little bit more when we start working on journals. There are times when journals are listed in, number. depending on the year of publication and the order of publication. So it's kind of a subset of the version. Right, number 7, the publisher. It's pretty straightforward. It is the company that has published the text. And you'll notice that, here also in previous versions of MLA, you would also have to put the city of publication. They have removed that from the 8th edition. A lot of publishing houses have multiple cities of publication, so they've decided that the publication city is no longer relevant information as long as you have the actual publishing company. Right, number 8, the publication date. I'll just say for this one, be really careful about the publication date, especially if you have a text that has multiple editions. You want to make sure that you note the publication date for the actual edition that you're using. So if you kind of flip to the back of the title page in our textbook, you'll see a series of dates, and those earlier dates have to do with the earlier editions, of the textbook. So you want the latest edition if you are in fact using the the latest edition of that book. The other caution I'll give you with publication date, if you're using older texts, for example, let's say we were using a novel that was published in 1875. Sometimes you have, a version of the book that was published, like the actual text of it was published maybe last year because it's a new edition or something like that. You don't want to get that later publication date. You want the original date of the publication of that novel. So be really careful with, kind of citing the right publication date. And finally, number 9, the location of the source, and I'm adding in parentheses there. They mean the location of the source within the container. And for us, that's the equivalent of the page numbers. Because we're using a print version, we've got actual page numbers to locate the source. But you might have, let's say, like an ebook. Sometimes ebooks don't have like actual page numbers on them. They have like location numbers instead. So if you were citing from an ebook, you would use the location number, in that ebook instead of page numbers. So just kind of think about the source that you have, and if there is a specific way to locate where that source is in the container, then you go ahead and do it. Down here at the bottom of the page is a specific example from our textbook. So in the examples for essay number 1, I've been using King's Letter from a Birmingham Jail, so I'm going to continue to use that source here. Right, so I've got the author first, and again, you need to list the author by last name. All right, and notice the punctuation there. I've got a comma after the last name. I've got a comma after junior as a subscript. All right, and then there's a period afterwards. Right, next I'm going on to the title of the source, right? So in quotation marks, I need the title of that essay. Right, afterwards, I've got the title of the container in italics, right? So that is the title of our textbook. I've got my contributors. Notice that edited is written out, as a full word. In earlier versions of MLA, edited would be abbreviated, but they have taken away those abbreviations. So just go ahead and spell out the word edited. I've got my authors in the order that they're listed on the title page, right? So you don't put these authors in alphabetical order, you just list them as they're listed on that title page. All right, our book does have a version. This is the 6th edition of the book, right? So they're keeping that abbreviation ED for edition. Right, there is no number for the book. I've just got one edition, so I'm moving on to publisher. Pearson is the publication company. 2017 is the publication date. All right, and the location of the source, so Letter from a Birmingham Jail exists on pages 151 to 163 of our textbook, so I've noted that there. All right, the other thing I just want to point out here is the formatting of the citation. All right, in earlier versions of MLA, I'm just going to highlight it here. This entire citation would be single-spaced. That is no longer because I think of the advent of more word processing programs that have auto-formatting. Your entire citation list will now be double-spaced. All right, the first line here of the citation is flush with the left margin. Right, anything that comes afterwards needs to get indented. All right, and you'll notice that, kind of a little tricky when you are making the citations. I'll do an example here. All right, if, your auto formatting is on and you go to hit, the indent here, sometimes it tabs over like your entire piece. So you might have to hit the return key here and then tab over. Right, so just a little trick there. Right, and final note on formatting, just be really mindful of the punctuation here. You'll notice that all throughout this piece until I get to the page numbers, right, those are all commas that are used in there, and MLA is justifying that by, saying that all of that information is specific to the container. All right, so be really careful with the punctuation there. All right, and that is it for documenting sources. In terms of the parenthetical citations, your parenthetical citations will look just the same as they did for English 1. So you've got your author's last name and the page number or whatever location information you do have in the parentheses, no comma.